Welcome, and thanks for tuning in. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Carice Anderson. I'm Lynn Berger, host of Lynn Berger Interviews Remarkable People. Today, we're going to speak about her career, the transitions she made, and this wonderful book she wrote, Intelligence Isn't Enough: A Black Professional's Guide to Thriving in the Workplace. So welcome, everyone. You're in for a treat. Carice, take me back to your earlier years. Did you know what you wanted to do as a child?
First off, Lynn, thank you so much for having me. And the answer to that question is yes, I did have an idea of what I wanted to do, but I think I got persuaded to not pursue what my initial interests were. So I think, I did this summer program when I was a junior and right before I was going into my junior year of high school. And in this booklet, I put that I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. And for some reason, I think because I come from a family of folks who majored in the social sciences, they discouraged me from doing that. And then they basically said, no, do something where you can make a lot of money, go into business. So that's honestly how I ended up majoring in business and in undergrad and working in the business space.
Okay. All right. But I think from reading your book and getting to listening to your podcast, there is some clinical psychology in there.
Yeah, I think it's woven in there, right? I think that wannabe psychologist is in there. And it's funny because both of my husband's sisters are clinical psychologists. So I try to
Okay.
get a lot of advice from them too.
There you go. As you share interests with people, you find them in your life. So take us back. So to your studies, you studied business, and lead us through your career from the earliest points and studies.
I always say that, my career has happened in sort of four phases.
Mm-hmm.
So if I talk about before I actually started working, when I landed at university, I was the first person in my family to major in business. I come from a family full of social workers, ministers, and teachers. And so no one could really give me a lot of advice about the business world. And I remember, my junior year came up and I had to pick a major. And I remember looking at the list. I was like, finance, no, econ, no, I want to do that. Management, that sounds too generic. Healthcare management, no, I want to do that. And I was like, marketing, okay, I'll do that. Like, that's literally how I picked my major. I did no research. I had no clue of what I could actually do with a marketing major, but it just sounded kind of good. And I guess when I think about the psychology aspect of it, the marketing part, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of consumer behavior and how consumers think, I think there was maybe subconsciously there was some sort of connection there.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about those four phases of my career, the first phase right out of undergrad, I had no direction, Lynn, no clue what I was doing. And I thought that I had it all together. That's the most dangerous, ironic part of it.
I think a lot of people feel that.
I
Yeah.
didn't, I had no clue what I was doing, but I thought because I'd been told my whole life, like, oh, you're smart and you just need to go to college and get that piece of paper. I thought I had it all together. And I made choices very haphazardly, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend and a sorority sister that were working at a company, and they said, hey, why don't you come on over here? And so that's basically how I ended up in this job. It wasn't that I thought it was a good fit for me from a strengths perspective or from a culture perspective. It was just they were paying $32,000 a year, and I thought that sounded like I'd won the Georgia lottery. So I joined this organization. To no one's surprise, I was not that happy. And I had a friend who was working at Arthur Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, why don't you come over here? Some of the things that are irritating you about your current job, we don't do that kind of work here. And I think you would find some, because I was really looking for more seasoned people to help guide my career. My
Mm-hmm.
first manager out of undergrad was, 2 years older than me. And I thought, how is she going to help me? She doesn't have enough years on the earth. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? She doesn't have enough distance
Sure.
between where I am and where she is to really be able to help me. So I go to Arthur Anderson thinking I'm going to stay there until I figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And then it implodes while I'm there. So for those of you that are listening that are not familiar with Arthur Anderson, it used to be one of the big five accounting firms. along with PwC, E&Y, KPMG, and Deloitte.
Mm-hmm.
And it collapsed while I was there. And as part of it, I ended up going to Deloitte. Deloitte ended up sort of assuming Anderson's client work in North America. And so that's how I ended up at Deloitte
Mm-hmm.
and stayed at Deloitte. So that's kind of that first phase of my career. I say the second phase started after business school. So I went to Harvard Business School, decided, in my mind, I went there thinking I was going to work in the nonprofit. And I think some of that was influenced by my family.
Mm-hmm.
I've come from a family, like I said, social workers, ministers,
Mm-hmm.
teachers, people who really give back. And I thought, well, maybe that will make me happy is to be able to give back and to work in the nonprofit space. And what I ultimately discovered at business school was I really wanted to work in the people space. I don't think I was too attached to the industry or the
Mm-hmm.
function, or to the industry, but I was attached to that function. I think
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to work in the people space. So I ended up going back to Deloitte, and got to a point where I was just kind of tired of consulting. I'd been doing it for 8 years at that point, and I think I just wanted a change. And I ended up working at Fulton County Schools. I was reporting to the deputy superintendent, working on all of her projects. All of them were in the people space, and I really loved it. But in that time, I ended up I met my husband actually at Harvard Business School, and we started dating and got married, and moved to South Africa where he was
Mm-hmm.
living, which began sort of the third phase of my career. And I
Mm-hmm.
I joined McKinsey while I was there, worked in as a professional development manager, supporting consultants in terms of staffing, running performance reviews. I ran a leadership development program while I was there, and was at McKinsey for almost 4.5 years. And once again, was like, I need a change, want to do something different. There weren't many opportunities on the continent that
Mm-hmm.
I could take advantage of. And so I decided to leave, and I went to work for what I affectionately refer to as a start down, because it never really started up. Was there for 8 months and then decided to, do some contract work, and I ran a small business for a little while, and then I joined Korn Ferry, which is, a human capital consulting firm. Really
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed my time there. COVID happened while I was there. My father-in-law passed away, and I was just ready to be closer to family and friends. And so thus began the fourth phase of my career, which is returning to the US in 2021. And I work once again in the HR space for an asset management firm.
Okay. Well, what a career, and you end up with the people all the time, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think
No,
I
that's
think that's
not.
where I'm supposed to be for sure.
So how long were you in South Africa?
For 10 years.
Okay, that's a
Mhm.
long time.
Yeah, from 2011 until 2021.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about working there versus working here and any differences?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, South Africa's it has a very complicated history, with apartheid, and I think with some of the government's agenda and mandate to try to right the wrongs of the past. And so it's complicated in the sense, on one hand, I think you get a lot of opportunities because you are well educated. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, South African companies are looking for talent. But on the flip side, I think you don't get as many opportunities because you're not South African. And so it's kind of a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
tension there. I think the other element is working within a culture that is very different than your own. I think American business culture and American culture in general is much more individualistic. It's
Mm-hmm.
much more about self. And I think South African culture is much more about us and we as opposed to I and me. And I think really adjusting to that, and the way that that plays out is, a real focus on relationships, a real focus on getting to know people. So when you get on a call in South Africa, you're not going to immediately dive into the work. You're going to spend the first 5 to 7 minutes talking about the weekend, your hobbies, the kids, your family. And I think I brought some of that here to the US, when and this is something that you do, even with the checkout girl at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
You need to ask her, how is she? Because there is this concept in South Africa called Ubuntu, where it basically means I am because we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to acknowledge your humanity before anything else, before I acknowledge what it is that I want from you, or what it is that the service that you provide or your role. It's like, who are you as a human? And I need to tap in and appreciate that. So I tried to bring that back to America, and people look at me like I'm crazy. I'm on the phone with like a customer service person, like, "Hi, how are you?" And there's this awkward pause. I could tell the person's thinking, "Why do you care?"
And before we get to the book, what are the lessons or any type, as you went through your career, what I know there's many because I've read and I've
Mm.
listened to some of your podcasts or interviews you've had, but could you, share with us a couple that if you knew then?
Say it's three things. I think number one, your mindset is key, and your mindset is your most important asset.
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter what happens to you in life, if you can keep the right perspective, if
Mm-hmm.
you can take accountability, if you can focus on what you can control and influence, you'll be a lot happier in your life and you'll feel a lot more empowered. So I think that's the first thing. And really
Mm-hmm.
just thinking about, if you think about an asset, you want to protect it, you want to preserve it, you want to grow it and nurture it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what you need to do with your mindset as well. Because I've seen people be in similar performance situations, similar career situations, and you have somebody who will spiral down, and then you'll have somebody who'll spiral up. And it's just a matter of how they looked at the situation and how they took personal accountability and ownership for it. I think the second thing, which is why I've titled my book Intelligence Isn't Enough,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is being smart and having the right pieces of paper and qualifications and working hard and having the right skills is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
You need other people to invest in you, to develop you, to coach you, mentor you, sponsor you, give you opportunities, help you maximize those opportunities. You will never have the kind of impact that you want to have if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the right relationships. And
Okay.
notice I didn't say networking. I'm talking about real, genuine, mutually beneficial relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, a differentiator, for folks, and really thinking about how can I cultivate those relationships? How can I make those relationships beneficial for the other person and not just all about me? So I think that's something else that I think I just had no clue. I really, because people have been telling me my whole life I was smart, and it's like,
Well, it
oh,
didn't
okay,
hurt, but
yeah,
it's not all.
it's not everything, right? You get that piece of paper and you're like, oh, I'm set for life. And then I went and got a more expensive piece of paper and I was like, oh, I am really set now. And it's like realizing that's not enough, I think is really important. And I will just say the third thing is, ownership is key. Like you have to take ownership of your life, of your career, your relationships, your brand, how you deliver, how you show up, how you dress,
Mm-hmm.
all of that, you have to take ownership. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody is going to do it for you. You have to take the bull by the horns. You have to be, sort of the captain of that ship, and, you'll have other people who might serve as the GPS but you're going to have to be in the driver's seat and really, and like I said, focus on what you can control and influence is really critical in that sense of ownership.
Great advice. And is all intertwined in your book. And I do want to spend some time talking about the book now. There were points during the book where I felt like I was speaking to myself, like maybe you said it in a little bit of a different way, but
Mhm.
these are the things that I say and ways that I think. And one of the things that, and we spoke about this a little bit today, was I referred to it as relationships versus results. You got to establish the relationships before you go after the
Mhm.
results. And you shared some stories in your career of when it took a while. It takes a while to realize that because you're smart, you got your
Mhm.
degrees, you got to get things done, you got to move fast, you got to be, efficient. So tell us a little bit how that all came to you when you realized.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about one of the examples I share in the book. When I was working for the school district and the person I was reporting to, I come in, I'm all like eager and let's save the kids, I'm just super excited, right, to be in this
Mhm.
fellowship program. I had wanted to do it for I think 4 years at that point by the time I actually got into it. And I remember, coming to work for him and I had all these great ideas and I was thinking, oh, we can just make the team this so great and we can make our output so great. And I felt he was so resistant. to the new ideas and the things I was proposing. And in my mind, I still was not of the mindset that I need other people to be successful and to have impact. So I thought, well, I don't have time for that. I'm just going to keep my eyes on the prize and keep pushing forward. And eventually things came to a head and we ended up having a very tense and, unpleasant conversation. And as I walked out of that conversation, after I kind of calmed down, I thought to myself, how did I get here? What role did I play in this conversation
Mm-hmm.
and in this
Mm-hmm.
dynamic? And what is it that I need to do so I can make sure I never have another conversation like this again with another person? And I think
Good.
that was a realization for me that I could not be successful without this person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and I think this idea too that you're going to suppress when you're offended or when somebody, you know, says something in a way that doesn't really land with you. It's like, oh, I'm going to forget about that and I'm just going to keep moving forward. It's just not the truth, at least not for me. And I realized, there was something I learned about myself that when things happen that I'm really offended by, I need to address them because at some point you can only push things down for so long before they
Mm-hmm.
sort of pop up in a very kind of uncontrolled, borderline unprofessional way. And so and I never had another conversation like that one again, Lynn.
Well, it was
I learned
worthwhile
my lesson.
experience.
Yeah, I learned my lesson, and I think the other part that I really learned was just understanding the context before you step into a situation. There was history, there were things that happened before I ever stepped foot in that organization. And I don't think I took that into account,
Mm.
and thinking about if that would have helped me sort of adjust or maybe soften my approach in terms of proposing all these new ideas if I had taken some time to really learn the context. I think it would have made that working relationship so much better and so much more effective. And I think that situation was a big learning lesson for me.
Okay. Well, it sounds like it really did end up helping and supporting you in a big
Mm,
way. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
now there were a few more things from the book that I just wanted to spend some time on today. And one of the others that, really struck me was this working in or on your career.
Mm, yeah,
Why don't,
absolutely.
why don't you share with the audience what you mean by that?
When I was living in South Africa, I ran a small business for a couple years. And in the entrepreneurial world, you'll often hear these phrases. And one of the phrases was work in your business versus work on your
Mhm.
business.
Mhm.
And it basically means, so like, for example, let's say I had a cupcake business. Working in my business is buying my ingredients, mixing up my cupcakes, delivering my cupcakes to my customers. Working on my business would be taking a step back and saying, should I even be selling cupcakes? Should I be selling cookies or brownies or donuts? It's
Mhm.
really asking those larger questions like, am I selling my cookies and my cupcakes in the right place at the right
Mhm.
time to the right customer, right price point? And what I realized is that same philosophy or approach could be applied to working in and on our careers. I think a lot of us, I think especially as underrepresented groups, women, people of color, we work in our careers. We're very good about doing our jobs and doing it at a high level. But I think we don't spend enough time working on our careers. So taking
Mhm.
that step back to say, am I developing the right skills, the right relationships, at the right level at the right time? Am
Mhm.
I living up to the expectations of the people around me in terms of my performance? Am
Mhm.
I growing at the right pace? Am I getting on the right projects that are going to sort of advance me and propel my career? So I think we have to take that step back to make sure that our efforts are going in the right direction and focus on the right areas, right? Because you can kind of be spinning your wheels like a
Oh,
like a,
sure.
a hamster, and you're not really going anywhere. You got
Absolutely.
there's a lot of activity.
Now, the other point about there's three things you said: knowing yourself, knowing others, and knowing your environment. You want to spend a few minutes on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I call those my three corporate muscle groups. I
Mhm.
know we've all seen the person who goes to the gym and he's got like this massive chest, arms, and shoulders, but he has little toothpicks for legs, right? And I was listening to this personal trainer talk about how when we don't train all of the muscle groups in our body, we put our body at risk for injury and we don't give our bodies the opportunity to realize its full potential. And I
Mhm.
realized, oh my gosh, it's the same thing with our careers. I think we sometimes over exercise and over index on hard work, building technical skills, and getting qualifications. But I think those other muscle groups, the knowing yourself, knowing others, and knowing your environment, are those three corporate muscle groups that we don't sometimes focus enough time on. And
Mhm.
I think they impact, how we spend our time and how hard we work and the skills that we develop, right? We just need to, be really thoughtful
Mhm.
about knowing ourselves, others, and our environment. And then I say that we integrate the knowledge of those three to build a personal brand and a communication style that allows you to have maximum impact. So if you don't know yourself, Lynn,
Mhm.
you can't understand what is it that I uniquely bring to the table. What are my strengths and
Mhm.
areas of
Mhm.
development, my perspective, my motivations, my aspirations? Like, you need to understand who you are. So then that helps you position yourself around people and in environments that really value what it is you bring to the table. If I don't know other people, I can't connect my work to theirs.
Mhm.
I can't understand how best to work with you if I don't understand how you like to be communicated with and what you're trying to achieve and how my work fits into that, right? And then the environment is I have to understand what works in this space
Mhm.
because this space is different than that space. And
Mhm.
what works here may not work there. And so I think understanding all of those three elements is really important because then if I understand myself, I can show up authentically in a way that works for the people around me and that works in that environment. And I feel like that helps me really be able to have the kind of impact that I ultimately want to have.
No, I think it was very well stated. And I also want to say, I mean, part of this is when people grow and develop within their careers, because this isn't something like day one.
Absolutely. It takes time for
It takes,
sure.
that patience factor,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, but I also think like there are more tools and resources to help somewhat expedite that.
Mm-hmm.
I think like taking assessments,
Mm-hmm.
people can argue which ones are the good ones or the
Mm-hmm.
bad ones, but I think all of them give you a little bit of a window into who you are. I
Mm-hmm.
think talking to people around you, asking them, what do you think it is that I'm really good at? What do you
Mm-hmm.
think my strengths are in my areas of development? Looking at the feedback that you've gotten over time. So doing some of that self-reflection to ask yourself, what's the red thread through all of,
Mm-hmm.
these different data points that can help give me some insight. Also asking yourself, like, what is it that I do that brings me joy, that lights me up, that energizes me, that I could do for, and lose track of time, that
Mm-hmm.
somebody wouldn't even have to pay me to do. Like, these are the things, if we understand that about ourselves and we can think about how can I put myself in a position, in a role, in a function, in industry around other people who value those things that I uniquely bring. And that's why I laugh when I think about my first job out of undergrad. I was a systems tester, Lynn. I had no business doing that job. I was like, no wonder I was miserable, but I didn't know who I was and I didn't know what my strengths were and what I enjoyed doing. I was making decisions solely based off of money, which, money's important, but I think we can try to do that and do some things that speak to who we are and our strengths and what it is that we truly want to do with our time and our energy.
I picked out my gems of the book. I want to give you an opportunity to share. We have a few minutes left. Some, one or two that really resonated with you that you'd like to share.
I think one of my biggest learnings, I will say, is trying our best to remove our ego. Because
Yeah.
we talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion as if it's like this magical rainbow location, where it's just like, oh, we're celebrating each other's differences. Working with people who are different than you is really hard. And it's really trying, right? And I think there's our ego is telling us that what we bring to the table is the only thing that matters. And then if people don't bring that, then they don't matter or they're incompetent or they shouldn't have this job. Whereas we need to be looking at it like there are certain things that I bring, but there are also certain things I don't bring. So
Mhm.
how can I find people who complement my skill set and bring things that I don't bring? And how do I leverage what it is that they bring and what it is that I bring so that we can serve the client or serve our customers or have this impact? So I think that for me was one of my biggest lessons
Mhm.
is learning that people are different
Mhm.
and that there's value in that difference.
Okay.
And to think about how do I bring all of that together, what I bring and what that person has in order to have a better outcome and a better deliverable, I think was one of my biggest learnings from my career.
Yeah, I think anytime the ego gets involved there, the decision making isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of ego out here, Lynn.
All right.
There's a lot, especially I think smart people sometimes are some of the worst because our whole lives we've been told like, oh, you're so smart, and you've gotten all this external validation
Mhm.
that's told you that what that sort of typical IQ is what is most important in the world. And you're
Mm.
not realizing there are people that know how to influence better than you. They know how to build relationships. They know how to get ideas executed throughout a large organization. They have the right networks. There are things that your little brain can't do by itself. So that has been my biggest lesson, in terms of my own career for sure.
Okay. Anything else? We have about a minute or two before we wrap up. Any other things you'd like to say today? Any lessons learned? Anything from your book? And then we'll share your contact information.
What is something I would share? No, I'm using up my minute. I think, my book is jam-packed with a lot of
Mhm.
content. Pick 2 to 3 things. Don't feel like you need to do everything. Pick 2 to 3 things. I really want you to live it. And so pick
Mm.
those 2 or 3 things that you think could make a step change in terms of, your mindset or your relationships or your career or the impact that you want to have and put a plan in place and hold
Mhm.
yourself accountable and maybe find an accountability partner that you can report to, in terms of your progress and where you might need help.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this interview. Thank you so much. And why don't you share how people can find you?
You all can find me on my website at cariceanderson.com. So CARICE Anderson with an O at the end.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you. I look forward to your next book.